Morning, everyone. My name is Zach, and I do creative placemaking. How many of you have heard the term creative placemaking before? A few of you. Okay, so please all be in the hallway after to explain what it is to me. We work in about 20 states all over the country. We primarily work in rural communities. And we are called Alchemy Community Transformations because we believe that there's a formula to help communities grow, but there's also a little bit of magic that you need every single time. And we're going to talk a little bit about the future of community planning and how that relates to technology. I live in Iowa City, and this is a terrible conference to be presenting at a week after one of the world's most epic internet failures I've ever seen. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's the Iowa caucuses. We'll just work past that. No, I don't know who won. So I live in Iowa, but I'm originally from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I grew up in a small rural community of 2,500 people. By the time I graduated high school, it ceased to be rural and it got sucked into the Philadelphia metro, and it became suburban. And I watched that transformation happen my entire childhood. I never really wanted to happen again. I went to college. I was a theater and philosophy major, so I had absolutely zero job prospects when I graduated. And I moved to London. I lived there for 2 years doing theater. My visa expired. I came back to America. I did what every other theater kid did, and I went to New York. I lived in Brooklyn for about 10 years. And in New York City, I ran theater companies and restaurants and quickly realized the last thing New York needed was another theater or another restaurant. I also looked around myself in Brooklyn and realized that I was in a bubble. Everybody thought like me, acted like me, looked like me, played like me, and I didn't think that that was very healthy, either as an artist or as a human. And I knew I wanted to leave. I wasn't sure where I wanted to go, so I did this ridiculous road trip over the summer of 2007. I drove to 22 cities, including Raleigh, looking for where I wanted to live. I was specifically looking for a community that was roughly 500,000 people in the metro, a city that had a downtown that needed to be revitalized, a city that was struggling to attract and retain the next generation of workforce, a city that was burgeoning on the art scene but not all the way there yet, and a city that was as close to 50-50 politically as I could find. And Des Moines checked all my boxes. And so in the fall of 2007, I moved to Iowa. I didn't know a single person in the state. Now I've got a wonderful wife and 3 kids, and that's what happens when you move to the Midwest. So I've been in Iowa now for 12 years, and the reason why I moved there was to start a nonprofit called the Des Moines Social Club. The Social Club is an arts and educational nonprofit based in downtown Des Moines. This is the building right here. It's a 1937 Art Deco firehouse. We purchased from the city. It raised a little over $8 million to historically preserve it. The Social Club produces works in all different arts disciplines, and the mission of the Social Club is how do you build community through the arts? And that's basically the mission of every single arts-based nonprofit anywhere. And I want to tell you a quick story about how we learned how to do this and how it relates directly to the work that I do today. So we didn't always have that great firehouse. We had this crappy building in downtown Des Moines. This building was held together by dirt. We were fortunate enough to get a 1-year lease inside the building. We opened up a makeshift art gallery, a makeshift theater, makeshift bar with a cabaret stage, and 2 classrooms, and we started doing shows. And the first group that ever came to rent our theater was a group called 3X Wrestling. And they do WWE-style wrestling events. Now, we never thought we'd have wrestling in our theater, but they had money, so we said yes. So they started renting the theater every first Friday, and as you might imagine, there are very specific types of people who come to see wrestling. On the same evening, in the bar, totally coincidentally, we booked a jazz and poetry night. And as you might imagine, there are very specific types of people that come to see jazz and poetry. These 2 worlds would never be caught dead socializing together. And that's exactly what happened. The first month, everybody came, they got a drink at the bar, they ran off into opposite directions. Second month, same thing. But the third month, something really interesting happened. And this was the kernel for everything the Social Club became and for the work that we do now. The wrestlers were on their intermission. They were running into the theater and getting a drink and running back to the theater to avoid the poets because they're so scary. But there were these 2 guys, 6'5", full leotards, standing 5 feet away from me, drinking a beer and watching the poetry. And they suddenly turned to me and they said, "Hey, are you the guy who runs this place?" I said, "Yeah." They asked if they could talk to me in private. So we sat down in my office. I asked what I could do for them. They said, "Listen, we'd love to get more involved." I said, "Great, we're a nonprofit. Here's 10 different volunteer opportunities." They said, "Yeah, we had something else in mind." They looked around to make sure nobody was listening, and they whispered, "We both write poetry." And they asked if they could read their poems at the club. And I said, "Well, sure, it's an open mic, anybody can." And thus began our wrestling and poetry evenings. So the following month, these 2 brave guys, they went and watched the wrestling, they came out, they read their poems on stage, which were actually pretty good, and they went back and wrestled some more. The following month, the people watching the wrestling came out to watch the poetry at first to support their friends, and then they kind of got into it. 2 months later, the poets, encouraged by this behavior, said we should probably go check out what they do. They went into the theater to watch the wrestling, and they walked out saying, that was awesome. 10 months in, we had to change the times of the program so people could go to both. Now, this was Iowa in 2008, back when the caucuses still had meaning. And the political conversations happening in that room till 2 in the morning were some of the most organic conversations, people who were diametrically opposed on many different issues, sitting there civilly having a conversation. Now, I don't necessarily think minds were being changed, but relationships were being formed. And we stood back and said, this is it. How do we replicate this model every evening? And so today, that's the work that the nonprofit and so many other groups do all across the great state of Iowa. So it's also about these two worlds. And Larry was talking a bit about this earlier. And to me, there's not a lot of difference between these two worlds and wrestlers and poets, except it's rare that you see them sitting down at a table actually having meaningful conversation. We call this work creative placemaking. It's a fancy way to say, how do we create the things in your community that's going to get the next generation of workforce to come, and also not alienate the people who have lived there all of their lives? And we ask communities this question: do you need more people? 95% of the time we hear yes. Sometimes we hear no, and that's when we're in Austin. So when we ask that question, we're also specifically looking for how it can grow. And there's this myth about rural America that there's no good paying jobs there, and that's a myth. The reality is there's not enough people to take the jobs. There's thousands of good paying jobs out there. We need more people to take them. And the old version of economic development that we played with for decades is creating incentives for companies to get them to move to your community to create as many jobs as possible. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But it doesn't matter how much money you're going to offer a company to move there. If they don't have a workforce in a downtown that looks like this, they're not going to come. We just saw this play out with Amazon. There was never any doubt where Amazon was going to go, to the DC or New York City area. That's where the talent is. There were towns that paid or offered way more money than where those two locations paid. They were always going to go to the place that has the talent. It's also about what's unique in your community. How do you create that? How do you capitalize that? And if you ask millennials what it's going to take to get them to move to a community, I guarantee they're going to say one of these three things right off the bat. They're going to say they want mountains, they're going to say they want oceans, and they're going to say they want a professional sports team. Now, being that that's probably not going to happen in all rural locations everywhere, these are the worlds that we play in. They want a cultural community. They want smart transportation. That doesn't necessarily mean public transportation. In most cases, public transportation in a rural community doesn't make financial sense, but there's other ways to do it. They want great parks, walkability, and recreation. They want jobs. Jobs are important, but they're no longer the first, second, or third driver for what motivates a millennial for where they're going to live. And they want an entrepreneurial culture. If your community can capitalize on these 5 things, you're going to grow. Now, I talk a lot about the younger generation, but we break it into these 3 categories: 18 to 35, 35 to 55, 55 and up. Something we've learned, that first group, 18 to 35, and the last group, those 2 worlds, they basically want the same things. They just do them at different times of the day. Everybody wants to go downtown, have a nice meal, have something to drink, hear some live music, go shopping, walk on a trail. Some people do it between 4 and 8. Other people do it between 8 and 1 in the morning. People like me, I'm home with 3 kids anyway. I don't matter. It's that first group and last group that we put the focus on. And we also need to be paying attention to American migration. For the past 40 years, the coasts of our country, all of those cities, have been oversaturated. And people have been leaving, and where are they going? Here's a map of where they went between 2000 and 2007. Minneapolis, Kansas City, Nashville, Austin, Denver. I'm pretty sure that little pink square in the middle of Iowa represents me, because there was nobody else going there back then. But those are the second cities. And today, all of those cities are oversaturated, and we are now in the rise of the third city. That's places like Raleigh, places like Des Moines, Iowa, Boise, Idaho, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Madison, Wisconsin, Little Rock, Arkansas, Birmingham, Alabama. These are the places that are gaining population at similar rates that San Francisco did 100 years ago. So if that's true, we also believe that by 2030, 2035, those third cities, they're going to be oversaturated. And that's going to push people further out. And this presents a wonderful opportunity to bring urban and rural areas together. And the way that we achieve that is through technology. So this is our community hierarchy of needs. Doesn't matter how many cultural centers you have, or coding academies, or clothing stores. If there's nowhere to live, it doesn't matter. And if there's no way to get online, it doesn't matter. These are the pieces of the puzzle that we play with and we help communities create all the time. And it's also about disruption. Today, the biggest publisher in the world produces no content, Facebook. The biggest hospitality industry owns no properties, Airbnb, and the biggest transportation company owns no vehicles, Uber. That's disruption. And the question for all of you is, how can your community disrupt? What do you need to do that? And for sure, you need technology. So let's start with fiber. First of all, here's the map of US long-form fiber today. Apologies to South Dakota. This is where it is right now. It's unlikely to change anytime soon, but as you can see, it leaves out most of our rural communities and bringing the fiber out to there. So we did a study, and we used the Iowa Communications Network first. It's a fantastic network as far as states go. The problem is this runs fiber to every single county courthouse in all 99 counties and every public school building. The problem is it's illegal to use if you're a private company. And that's a legislative issue that we're working on. But it's already there. So we looked at Sheffield, Iowa. Little over 1,100 people in this community. And this is the spectrum that we were trying to get in to get connectivity. And what we learned is there's 480 homes there. There's no fiber to any of them. But if we had an investment up front of $2 million and people were paying $80 a month on average for the service, with 79% of those folks taking it, this new company would be profitable by year 2. And that's not using any dollars from the FCC that just appropriated $20 billion to do this work. This can happen. We think all the time it's not affordable. We can't make it work. It can work. There's changes to legislation that we need, but there's also ways to make it happen today. This can happen in a community of 1,100 people. And in 1936, we had the Rural Electrification Act. It was not financially feasible to run electrical lines down 2 miles of road to 3 houses. Same thing is true today, or so we think, for fiber. And it took an act of Congress to make that happen and the economic explosion that happened because of that. So we believe 2020, there should be another act and it should become a public utility. But that's for another day. So that's our fiber. Now we need houses to run the fiber too. We have a housing shortage, specifically in rural communities all across the country. And the reason there's a shortage is because the wages have either decreased or not kept up with urban areas, so all the folks left and clogged up the cities. So we have to pay more to get them to come. The cost of building goes up every year, and there's few amenities. You add all this up, you've got a housing crisis. Today, the average cost for a one-bedroom apartment in rural America and underserved urban area is $525. But if you're going to build a brand new apartment complex anywhere in America today, you're going to have to charge, on average, $975 for that one bedroom. That's a financial gap that we can fix. For single-family homes, the average valuation of a single-family home in rural America today is $72,000. But if you're going to build a brand new 3-bedroom, 2-car garage house anywhere in America, you're going to have to spend at least $185,000 to do it, which means you're going to sell it for over $200,000, which prices out most of the market. There's a gap there. These are financial problems, not demand problems. We can fix this. There's trillions of dollars out there to do it, and we can help find those dollars. Then we have to think about what the driverless economy is going to do to help bridge rural and urban. So I want to show you a picture of my car. I'm joking. This is a Mercedes. This is what it looks like inside. You're going to be able to work while commuting. How is that going to change the landscape of urban and rural areas of folks that commute every single day back and forth? It's going to start with people commuting 5 days a week, and eventually it's going to go down to 0. They're going to want to stay where they are, and they're going to work from home, and things are going to begin to shift. So which rural community is going to act now and say, you know what, we're going to invest in this. We're going to become the first driverless economy for a rural community in America? It doesn't exist yet. Remote medical services are getting more popular all the time. The unfortunate reality is that we can't build hospitals in every single rural location anymore. They're closing all over the place. So how do we get folks to get that medical attention? And it's using the internet, and it's using tactile pads. How do we work through this, and how can we take things like this and help rebuild empty or vacant properties in our downtowns? Same thing for remote education. This is already happening everywhere. We can beam anybody into any classroom anywhere in the world. Again, this is another return to the one-room schoolhouse concept, but also we can pair this with medical services and fill up our downtowns. Then sensors. I love sensors. Sensors are everywhere. Right now, if you have a car that was built after 2018, it's full of sensors all over the place, everywhere you go. They're almost completely driverless, and it's only going to improve. Not to mention our highway systems and our rural systems, hopefully, will be beaming back and forth information between these sensors all the time. What we want to see happen, which is happening a little bit, is putting these sensors into the roads. Why can we do that? How is that going to help this process? First of all, it could charge the vehicles as they drive over it if they're solar powered. We can monitor traffic systems and reduce and eliminate accidents, which is going to be a huge disruption to the driverless economy, or driving economy, rather. We can melt snow and ice if it gets, you don't have that problem too much here, but back where I'm from, it's a big issue, and municipalities spend millions and billions of dollars on street repair, sand, salt, all of these things. We can eliminate all of that, and we can sense when there's damage or about to be damage and fix it. This is a billion-dollar industry that is about to hit us, and rural locations and areas inside of cities are not prepared for it, but we can begin to do that work today. And then my favorite, I've spent 4 years figuring out how to 3D print a building. And I've looked into all different aspects of this, and this is where I landed at, finally, I thought this is the best possible system. So this is the first 3D printed building in Europe. It's called the BOD. It was printed by Cobod in Copenhagen by this man. His name's Henrik. And if you need to know anything about the 3D industry, you need to talk to this guy. The Danish government has invested billions of dollars for them to be the leading country in 3D printing technology. He knows everything about it, and he's willing to share. He's very nice. This is the machine. It's hard to see up here, but that little blue thing in the middle there, that's the actual printer. It prints concrete. Concrete comes into it, it spits it out into whatever mold you want to make. What it's printing here is a base for a wind turbine. And I think we can get this video going here. Oops, maybe not. Let's see. Does video play? Maybe not. But this is a video, I swear, of the printer itself printing. And you can see it close up here. It spits out the concrete. In between those grooves there, as the concrete is drying, that's when you insert the conduit and the plumbing into it. And then you spray foam it for installation. You don't need drywall, nothing like that. You can print a 3-bedroom, 2-car garage house right now for under $160,000. Every year it gets better. Every quarter it gets faster. This is the first 3D printed office building. It's in Dubai. In Dubai, they believe by 2030, 25% of their buildings are going to be 3D printed out of concrete. This is what it looks like inside. It's like the Jetsons. You can print in any shape, any color, and you can make events around it, of course, as it's being printed. These are two 3D printed buildings printed as models side by side in China. The first is a 7,000 square foot mansion printed in a month, cost $161,000. Next to it is the first ever 3D printed 6-story residential tower, also printed in a month, cost between $200,000 and $300,000, depending on who you talk to. I bring this up because this industry is not taking root in a big way in America. There's people tinkering around with it, but the problem is that everybody's trying to do it in urban areas. And because of that, they're fighting zoning regulations, unions, the cost of land, all of these pieces. It's going to take 5 to 10 more years before this catches on in a major way in urban areas. But in rural areas, where there's major demand and the cost to build is too high, we believe this is the silver bullet. This is how we help change this. So this is a billion-dollar industry that rural communities can do that urban can't yet, and they need to get the start on it. So a couple success stories to close us out. This is the first rural forge. This is a project that we helped get going in the town of Jefferson, Iowa. Jefferson is about 4,000 people. It's an hour outside the Des Moines metro. And they had this building right there in the middle. A forge is a software engineering company. And they turned that building into this. They got investors from Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all sorts of big-time investors to a community of 4,000 people. The way it works is they start training kids in 7th grade in how to code. If they go through the entire program, by the time they graduate high school, they're guaranteed a job with a starting salary of $50,000 a year at age 18. This is a forge. They want to open up a dozen more of these across the country over the next couple of years. My favorite is Water Valley, Mississippi. Population about 3,500 people. Water Valley, this family, this is Alex and Kagan. They moved from New England down to Water Valley right outside Oxford, and they were looking around at what they want to do. They bought this building. On the first floor, Alex, she opened up BTC Grocery Store, Be the Change Grocery, an organic market and cafe on the first floor. And then upstairs, Kagan opened Basecamp Coding Academy. Basecamp works with about 20 students that graduate high school in northern Mississippi every year. They put them through a year-long boot camp in learning how to code. It costs about $9,000 per student to go through it. All of those dollars are fully paid for by FedEx in Memphis and tech companies in Jackson, because those companies guarantee they will hire the kids as soon as they finish that program with an average starting salary of $62,000 a year. It's a nonprofit. Kagan is a super nice guy, and he's willing to share his blueprint anywhere as long as you open it as a nonprofit. It's a fantastic system. When we got these wonderful portals, there are 30 of these all over the world. This one is on the south side of Chicago. I went into this portal. It's a gold shipping container. The door was closed behind me, and suddenly I found myself talking to Remy. Remy lives in Iraq. He's 19 years old. We have had a 45-minute conversation about his life and mine. His life way more exciting than mine. It felt like we were there together in the same room. These are built for cultural awareness and understanding. For $20,000, you can drop one into the middle of your community for permanently or just for a month. And the amount of people that are going to come out to participate in this. I could have talked to somebody in Mexico City, somebody in Afghanistan, somebody in Denmark, all over the world, and there's more and more of these popping up. It's a company called Shared Studios. We call these things touch services. You can't get your hair cut online. You can't get your nails done online. You can't go out to dinner online. You can't have a cultural experience online. These are the pieces that can remake our communities. And when we look at a vacant or available property, we like to say available, not vacant, sounds better, for one of these buildings in our downtowns, we immediately start thinking of what can be done in there. Second floor, residential, that's easy. First floor, maker spaces, coding academies, STEM training centers, cultural centers, live music venues, coffee shops. How can we begin to combine some of these business concepts into one entity that's for-profit and nonprofit to bring in different types of revenue? These are the things that can survive. If you're going to build a store that sells things that you can buy online or at Walmart, it's unlikely to survive. But these touch services are the pieces that can grow. We also need incentives for people, not companies. It's not bad to incentivize companies, but let's change it a little bit and start incentivizing people. What does your community need? What kind of profession does it need? Public school teachers, police officers. We did one of these recently for a reporter for a small town paper. And when you look at these incentives, they're happening all over the country right now. If you take a job today at BNSF Railroad in Missouri or Kansas, they're going to give you a $25,000 signing bonus. If you want to move to rural Vermont, you don't even have to work there. You just have to live there. The state of Vermont will give you $10,000, no questions asked, to move there. If you want to be a nurse in rural America, there's such a shortage for nurses throughout rural America that they will not only pay for any more schooling you need or your kids' schooling, in many cases they'll buy you a house. If you want to move to Marnie, Iowa, they will give you free land if you build on it. There's a dozen programs like this throughout the country right now. These are the incentives that are out there. So the question for all of you is that I'd love you to think about is, what can your community do to incentivize more people to come there? What kind of program can you create? They can be small, they can be big. But everybody can do something to incentivize more people to come. And I want to close with a quick story about why there's a perception issue, especially for rural communities, when it comes to technology or new inventions or anything like this. I was in a town called Algona, Iowa, about 5,000 people. And I was interviewing this woman, and she said to me, well, you know, the thing in Algona is we get things 7 years after Des Moines. I said, that's funny, because the joke in Des Moines is we get things 10 years after New York. So I said, wait a second. You're telling me you get things 17 years after New York? And she looked me dead in the eye, and she said, well, yeah, I mean, we just got hummus. And she was serious. She's like, have you tried hummus? It's really good. And this was 2017. I went and looked it up, and around about 2000 was when hummus started appearing on most major supermarket shelves. It's bizarrely accurate. But this is a perception problem. This is something that we believe because we're in a smaller community, whether that's in an underserved urban area or in a rural community. We believe that we can't have the nice things. We can't invent. We can't innovate. And the answer is that we can. We can do all of those things, and we need to get over that perception issue that we hear all the time. There's so much more that we can do. So if we are going to compete with the first and second cities in the world, we're going to have to bridge that gap between urban and rural, and we can do that through technology. We need to take a place like Raleigh and draw a circle of 2 hours around it. How are we communicating and working with all those communities? Because those communities are very dependent upon Raleigh and vice versa. And that needs to be true for urban areas as well. And as things oversaturate, people are going to go out further. Distances are going to become shorter. Technology is going to help to bridge that gap. We have to prepare our communities for 30 years from now. What does your town look like in 30 years? Who lives there? What do they look like? How do they get around? Where do they live? What do they eat? What do they do? How do they work? Let's picture that and work towards that. And eventually we will get there. So that is creative placemaking and helping to bridge those divides. Thank you so much for your time this morning.